meeting, a special meeting of Brent County Council to order, noting that Councillor Coleman's not coming. Councillor Chambers could be coming. He's sometimes a little late. And I haven't heard anything from Jennifer Kyle. So we're all here that are coming, and we'll start. That's the attendance, Spencer, which takes us to number 2 on the agenda. And that's just the approval of the agenda, noting that with a special meeting, we can't add or take anything away from the agenda. And I need a mover, Councillor Oakley and Councillor Pierce. All those in favor, just to receive the agenda as it stands, thank you. And with that, we will have any pecuniary interest brought up when you find one or see one, which takes us to number 4 on the agenda, which is the staff reports. And Brandon, you're going to take this, I believe. Noting that this meeting has really been called as an information session or a planning session. I don't know, Brandon, do you want questions as we go, or do you want to wait till the end, or does it matter?
Do questions as we go?
Yeah, through your worship to council, just a couple really brief comments before we get into this, and to answer Mayor Bailey's question, absolutely questions as we go. So what we're doing here this evening is a special education session just on the transition to the new community planning permitting system. With our last report that came forward, we recognized that there were numerous questions that councillors had about various components, how it will work, what it will look like, why we're doing it. And so we thought we would take the opportunity just to provide all members of council with an open format to ask all those questions that you have. Brandon and Nagin have a fantastic presentation that they're going to take council through. Just looking for some input specific to tonight. We're looking at comfort level with respect to delegation of authority, and also council's input on what the public engagement process will look like under each of the classes, because again, this is new, and the county will be, as some councillors mentioned before, we will be on the leading edge of this. You're right, there's 444 municipalities in this province, and there's probably under 20 who are moving forward with this. You could see that as a negative. I see it as a bonus. If it's a good idea, if it's going to streamline processes, if it's going to make development faster, easier for council, for members of the public, for developers, why not? Why not be on the front edge of that? And this isn't even the only kind of initiative that we're planning in this respect. I mean, we were talking about something earlier today where there's half a dozen municipalities on an initiative thus far, and should we jump on that and be one of the first? And if it's a good idea and it works for the residents and for council and for developers, why not? So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Brandon and Nagin. Ask lots of questions, as many as you can think of, so that we can gather as much input as we can, so that we can come back with something that really reflects something unique to the county, because this will be the only community planning permitting system like this. It will be unique to the county. And so with that, I will turn it over to Brandon.
Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you, Alicia. Good afternoon, evening, whatever it is now, to everyone. So thank you again for attending this discussion and education session. I recognize we're the only thing standing between you and dinner, so we'll try not to make it too boring for that. But yes, as Alicia said, questions, commentary during the presentation, more than happy to facilitate that. What we're trying to do here in essence is just break down this idea of this community planning permit system into some bite-sized chunks for us to digest and have the conversation about. We'll be starting this evening with respect to the development classifications or the classes of the bylaw, and as we've mentioned too, the delegated authority and the public engagement pieces. So I'll briefly touch on these first 2 points, the community planning permit system, what it is, and the adoption of it. We kind of went through that with the Trends and Issues report last time. There will be some future presentations on other specific topics, and I'll briefly touch on those as well. But what we're doing tonight is kind of presenting a learning opportunity with respect to that delegated authority and the public engagement. So what we're doing here is building a process. So the community planning permit system allows us kind of to create our own public engagement, create our own delegation of authority, and a planning process out of that. When you think of zoning bylaw and site plan control, the current process that we have, it's very rigid under the Planning Act. And something that the community planning permit system allows for us to do is to create our own versions of those processes for us to work our way through. So it gives us the opportunity to create stuff that will work better for the community. So I'm going to pose kind of 3 questions here just to think about overall as we're walking through this. So we're going to talk a bit about what's major, what's minor, and we've talked about that before, but I want you to think about, okay, what would constitute a major decision versus a minor decision? So for example, a subdivision plan. Would we think of that more as a major decision versus, say, a small site plan or a site plan amendment for someone building an addition to their industrial building? That may be minor. Contextually, I want you guys to think about a bit of that. Then building on that piece, what decisions then would come to council? So approving the detailed subdivision plan, is that something council would still want to see? Versus say maybe some routine lot line adjustments or part lot control where you've already seen the subdivision plan and maybe it's more technical work afterwards. And then the third piece of that will be the public engagement piece. So what types of public engagement or what methods of public engagement will help us meet the expectations of the public? So is that a full public meeting for, say, a zoning change? Is that people coming to present in front of council? Is that a drop-in session where they can come and talk to staff individually? Or is it just mailed notices for a minor application? So you'll see how those 3 kind of pieces interact between each other. So the classifications of major and minor, the decisions that council will make versus staff, and then the public engagement pieces. So what will fall into place to make the public engagement framework for each application. So again, community planning permit system, it's a land use planning tool similar to zoning, similar to site plan control. It's something that's enabled by the Planning Act. But what it does is it combines what we would call site plan control, zoning bylaw, and the operation of minor variances into one approval process. So what it does and what we've seen in other municipalities that have adopted it, it allows for a more efficient and cohesive review of development applications. It ensures consistent application of local standards, and those are standards we get to decide on, we get to develop ourselves. And then what it does overall is reduces an administrative burden and the redundancy that we sometimes see with multiple applications coming in and multiple studies being requested on the same type of application. So why adopt a CPPS? So first of all, our current zoning, the zoning bylaw from 2016, it has to be updated. That's a rule under the Planning Act. We have to update it within 3 years of adopting a new official plan. So whether we replace that with a new zoning bylaw and a new site plan control bylaw, or we replace it with this framework, the community planning permit system, regardless, needs to be done. So we've talked about this a bit as well. We've seen frequent amendments to that zoning bylaw. It has created some inconsistencies. It's reduced the clarity of the bylaw over time. And so what we're presented here is an opportunity to reset that, to come up with our own kind of modern defensible standards, stuff where we build in variations we think are appropriate. And that way we're not having people come and ask us for the same thing over and over and over again. So as Alicia mentioned, there's several municipalities exploring this. 7 municipalities have one in effect. 6 have drafts, and then there's 10 of us kind of going through this process of considering it and developing what this framework might look like, and Brant is one of those as well. So our suggestion from...
Excuse me, Councillor Pierce.
Sorry, Ms. Murray, yeah, through you, a perfect segue in there, Brandon. So these other municipalities that have been doing it, results are coming back positive. Obviously, that's why we jumped on board here. But how long have they been, how long of those, what did you say, 6 or 7 that are actually have it implemented, how long have they had it implemented?
So when I look at, so I'll use Carlton Place as an example. They have a town-wide CPPS, and it's been in effect since 2008. Gananoque has had one since 2011. And one of the things we were actually talking about today is that this system is the framework of it is based kind of on the development permit system that applies in the Niagara Escarpment area, and that's been in place since the 1980s.
Okay, so if I could follow up. So where I was going with that, and that was a perfect answer there. Even though there's only a few municipalities out of the 444, those that have been using it for long enough to understand that it is working and we're not jumping on the leading edge of something.
Correct.
Thank you.
Yeah, and so just on that point, that's part of why, or part of the evaluation we did while we were developing the new official plan was to look at that, knowing that some of these have been around for a little while. Typically, a municipality might wait till a larger, like some of the smaller municipalities might wait till a larger municipality dives in. But one of the things we've seen with this type of project is that the level of bureaucracy or the kind of the levels that you need to go through to get that approval and change an entrenched process in those larger municipalities is not going to happen as quickly as it can in a smaller municipality. And so that's why you see a lot of these smaller mid-sized cities or municipalities that have kind of jumped on the bandwagon and continue to do that. And we're only now seeing larger places like Oakville, Mississauga start to consider it. And even that, they're doing it in smaller areas.
Thank you.
Councillor Miller.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. To you, to Brandon, since we're already interrupted your train of thought, can you go back to your last, your very last slide?
Not that one. One more.
The next one. You had something in there about what? No, the next one. Why? So in there you have number 3, allows to replace rigid and outdated zoning regulations. When I read that, I think of Councillor Bell, and because he has asked several times at planning meetings that we have these zoning regulations in place, and it just seems that certainly every subdivision that comes in, they're always wanting to change the zoning regulations. And Councillor Bell asked the question, I think a lot of us are thinking, well, we have these in place, why are we changing them? Why don't we just follow what we have? So would we see a lot less of those, I guess?
We would. And the reason I say there's probably 2 pieces to that. So the zoning bylaw we have as it is, the 2016, implements an old plan. So it's from 2012, right? So that's the implementation vehicle for an old plan that had old objectives. It doesn't necessarily do what we want it to do anymore. The other piece of that is the change in the market, the change in kind of what's happening with housing and with development over time. In order to keep up on that, regular amendments to a bylaw are necessary. They're better done when they're municipally initiated, in my opinion. But when that doesn't happen, they have the opportunity, someone has the opportunity to request that privately, right? So in some instances, we'll see the same thing being asked over and over again. Usually that's a flag for the municipality to say, oh, hey, maybe we should look at this again. But the idea there is that whatever baseline we draw in the bylaw, it needs to be defensible. We need to have the defense to say, okay, this is why this is here. This is why we've chosen this standard. There may be a variation on each side of it, but this is the reason we have that in place, and that's why we do or do not support you coming in to change it. And some of that has been lost over time, I believe, with the current bylaw.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. Good answer.
Councillor Bell and then Councillor Oakley.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Brandon. I'm going back a page further where you say that we're going to be ensuring consistent application of local standards and provisions. I think later on when you talk about class 1, 2 and 3, I think you're saying we can have standardised classes, and I will, when we come to it, be interested to understand how you will determine what is a variation that needs to come to council and what is a variation that needs to go, or that can stay with staff. And I've got a couple of examples and I'll test them when we get there. But the consistent application of local standards is important, but it shouldn't be that we consistently drop our standards. And I think we had to be alert to that we don't come to some lowest common denominator rather than the highest common denominator.
Councillor Oakley.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Brandon, just sort of picking on the same thread as Councillor Miller, would it be fair to say that in our current system, one of the issues we may be having with folks coming and asking for changes consistently is that right now there is no incentive for them necessarily to come and ask for what's in our bylaw, but at least if we're moving ahead a bit in the slide and talking about the different classes, there would be a benefit to following the rules more rigorously in terms of both time and certainty, both of which also equal money for a developer to thus comply with our regulation.
Yes, so what I would say to that is, yeah, there will be benefits in, especially since we're modernizing the standards. What we're doing is reevaluating them and making them we'll look at the trends, right, and make it work for folks, but we're putting it in a local context. The other piece to that is something that the CPPS has that's unique. We don't have it with zoning, we don't have it with site plan. It's the idea of community benefits. So we have the standard set in our zoning bylaw right now. We will duplicate those or change a few of them, but move them over to our community planning permit system. And if someone wants to go beyond those standards or adjust them within a certain threshold, we can say, yes, but you need to provide this. So it gives us the opportunity to evaluate what the trade-offs are and kind of adjust, say, okay, an extra 2 stories of height is appropriate in this area if there are 4 units of affordable housing. So we have the opportunity to kind of, I guess, play that game, so to speak, to make sure that, like I say, the trade-offs that we're thinking about in planning, really there is a net benefit to the community overall. And we do not have that opportunity with just the zoning and site plan framework we have now. All right, I'll continue. Okay, so as I mentioned, chatting about some of these things today, we're going to focus on the development classes and delegated authority. We're also going to talk about public engagement. Some of the things we're looking at coming back and doing taking a similar approach would be conditions of approval. We'll talk about this community benefits piece in the future. The idea of design guidelines, that's one of the things within the community planning permit system. We can integrate more design-based standards, whereas zoning, you cannot do that. And then the 45-day approval process. So what that process looks like. And the reason we've kind of put that at the end is because we need to put these other puzzle pieces together first to figure out what our process is, and then we can determine and discuss that 45-day kind of window. And we had a training session today with staff, and you'll hear about it a bit during the official plan amendment presentation later tonight. But what we're going to be trying to do is introduce some similar framework through our official plan amendment, which will give us some flexibility between now and the time that this community planning permit system comes into place, so that we have time to play around with that 45 days. Because we know if we're just going to say, okay, in June, it's 45 days now, good luck, that maybe isn't the most realistic approach to trying to achieve a 45-day timeline. So we're trying to think about that ahead of time, give ourselves some flexibility now to play around with what works and what doesn't, and work our way towards that approval process. So the development classes, there you go, the development classes, and we'll just start, I guess, with those. Let me just go to this piece. So all of these pieces that we're going to talk about, again, they're building blocks to what this community planning permit system looks like. What we're presenting here with the class 1, class 2, class 3, that's kind of the standard across the board that we've seen with other community planning permit systems in the province so far. That doesn't mean we have to have 3 classes. We're not limited to that. We could have 10. Maybe not the best thing to do, but right now it seems that 3 classes is working for municipalities. That's what our consultant has recommended us to kind of work forward with. So that's the line that we've kind of set to have this discussion. So the idea is that class 1 is that any application that comes in that kind of meets all of the development standards of the community planning permit bylaws, so all of your zoning standards, and all of the uses that they're proposing are permitted in that zone. So that would be the easiest kind of application process. It goes through to its approval. Class 2, so the idea is that there's some variation that it needs in the development standards, but what we would do is set the variation limits. So whatever that variation limit looks like, that's appropriate for staff to approve, we would set that. Or there's the opportunity if there's a conditional use. So a use that maybe isn't permitted as of right, but if they are looking for it, there's a condition attached to it that they need to provide. So an example, so if a townhouse, for example, the coverage is 40%, say we get a proposal for 42%, that could be class 2, but if it's 46% over a 45% threshold, so we give 5%, then that would be class 3, and they could come to council. But that number, that 5%, is something we get to decide on. So the idea here is that class 1 and class 2 would provide for staff delegated authority, and we'll see this a bit later, but then class 3 would be the trigger to come to council for these larger applications.
Councillor Bell.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. You can ask, you know I'm going to ask the question. So how will you define these variation limits? And I'm going to draw a parallel to driving down the highway, and the speed limit says 100. But I know that if I drive 119 and I get stopped by the police, I'll just get fined. I won't lose points on my license. I have a feeling that if you set defined variation limits, they will become the norm. And then you won't have 3 classes, you only have 2 classes. So I would rather go, I would rather say we have 2 classes, which is class 1 and the rest. And I think you've got to convince me, and I hope the rest of us, that you could reasonably manage variation limits. Because I'm tired of developers coming here and having a shopping list of variations, which individually might be small, but collectively suddenly takes the number of dwellings they have on this piece of land from 500, and I'm thinking Sifton, it was 700 we got to. It's a big shift, and yet each little bit seems quite innocuous, but collectively it's quite considerable. So when you're thinking about if there is a class 2, then I think you've got to have some cumulative trigger that moves it into class 3.
And we have chatted about that as well. So there is the opportunity here to essentially bump up applications, which isn't something that we do have that opportunity with zoning, but not with site plan control right now. So adopting a CPPS will allow us, if there are combined processes like that, we can enable that opportunity for council or for the public or an applicant to bump the application up to a different class for the approval authority to be different. So that there is that opportunity. What I will say, I guess, on the variation piece is that I think what the intent of enabling the variations in the bylaw is to look at some flexibility when there's unique site conditions. Because we can pick a number for the entirety of the county of Brant, but then the way that it's applied in Harrisburg versus Calvin may be different, right? So it's trying to look at, okay, well, the number is 40%, but we think it's also acceptable if you go above it to 45 in these instances. So we're trying to think, I guess, proactively about that, but not undermine our own. I think that's kind of the fine line, not to undermine our own standards that way. What it also does is it supports adaptability for us as staff. It supports the idea that there's flexibility for residents to come in. If there is a certain number in the zoning that's built in, we get it. There's a difference between someone coming in with an application for their mother versus a developer coming in for a full subdivision. We see that on our level, right? Just the way that people can navigate the system. And we think that having these classifications will help the public navigate it a bit easier. Understanding that a variance is a scary thing for people that have never heard what that is, but if they just have to, they can still go through the process to get their variance rather easily. It's something we can walk them through a bit quicker than, say, having to come to council, present to the C of A, those types of things. That's something we can bake right into this process to make things a little easier for the public. And that's something we see as a bit of a benefit to it. I think what it will do as well is balance the idea of kind of what's predictable. And I think we've talked about this before, the idea of minor variance. What is minor? The test for it is minor in nature. What does that mean? And everyone's kind of opinion about that could differ. But this bylaw will give us the opportunity for us to say, okay, 5% is minor. If you're above that, you can go and get your approval for a Class 3.
So just a quick follow, if I may. So one of the tests that I would appreciate, then, if we go this route, is for you as planners to say, if the developer followed Class 1, there would be this would be the scale of the development, call it 100 units. But he's asking for more because we've allowed him to move into Class 2, or translate it another way, you know, the sum of all the small variances that they want results in going from 100 units to 125 units. And I think that's not minor. So somewhere along the way, I think you've got to get council on board with what is an acceptable level of minor variance. And I've seen, I mean, if I think about the another example that comes to mind is on Oak Park Road. If you can remember, we agreed 3 parcels of land to be developed on Oak Park Road. And the first parcel is being developed, and I'll use my hands. We agreed it to be that high. And now it's that high, and this council has seen nothing of that, because it went by a circuitous route through the Committee of Adjustment. And I do not consider that to be minor. Go to the next parcel of land to the west. It was going to be a quilting complex. The house that was going to be the core of that quilting complex has been demolished. I have no idea what they're going to do with that now. And these are the things that, as a councillor, I'm concerned that I don't know what's happening. So if a resident asks me what's going on there, I haven't got the faintest clue. And I think, you know, we need to be a bit more thoughtful about how we engage with councillors, who then in turn can engage with the residents who ask some very reasonable questions about what's going on there. For all I know, in that space where there's a quilting complex, goodness knows what it could be now. I just don't know, is the short answer. So I think you need to help us. If you want this to work, you need to help us be armed and understanding the significance of the changes that are being proposed.
Councillor Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And you're looking for feedback,
Yeah,
yes,
of course.
tonight. And when I was reading this section, I wrote down the word that you said, and that's bump up. And what I would suggest, and this is just my suggestion, is we as counselors have the ability to bump up an application if we feel that there is a significant public interest. And I'll give you 2 examples. First meeting of the Committee of Adjustment, not this term of council, the previous one. They were looking at a minor variance for a hog barn. Sounds minor in nature, except this whole place was completely packed. You couldn't have fit another person in there. So it was, I would say, keenly in the public interest, you know, that particular application. So I'd hate to see something like that dealt with at the staff level when there's so many people. There were so many people with a vested interest in how that turned out, and for good reason. And then, again, Brandon, if you could bring up the slide with the different classes. I'll go through another one. So Class 1 meets all development standards and permitted uses. So I'll give you another recent example you remember. A high-rise building in Paris, right? That actually met all the development standards and permitted uses. They were allowed to go as high as they wanted to, but there was a lot of members of the public that came out and spoke against it. You know, they bought their houses not knowing it, you know, whatever. So that's one thing I'd like to see is the option for a councillor to bump it up. Like I say, because we're tuned into what's going on in our community, and when people are upset, they reach out to us, and yeah, it'd be nice if we could hold a public hearing. A lot of times we can't change it, but at least if people know they're being listened to, it helps us. So that's my suggestion for that.
Councillor Oakley.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I think I'm going to speak a little in counter to my counterparts here. In referencing, I think as well, sort of a high-rise development, in being in Class 1, because in our official plan, we designated the area appropriate within Paris to have this development. In my mind, I think we are doing a disservice to the hundreds of hours collectively that we've spent in staff time council time, public engagement time, litigating to a very, with a very fine tooth comb. As we go and develop plans like our official plan, we're undermining it by, if I'm someone, whether I'm an individual or a developer, and I want to go build something on a piece of property, and it checks off everything to the letter within our official plan and with our zoning document, if it's not just, it's certain, if I can't have certainty that I'm going to be able to do it because I've hit every single checkbox that we say we want and that our zoning bylaw says that we want because we've spent hundreds of hours on this plan developing it, I think that undermines that process that we've gone through to develop that plan. I think that's maybe an indication for us to go back and look at those plans if that's something that's coming up frequently. But I would disagree with this idea that we should have our own trigger to bump things up, because I think that undermines what should be tried to accomplish with this, which is if people are following what we want to the letter of the law, they should be able to do it, no ifs, ands, or buts. And that, in regards to the public and people wanting to engage on those individual things, that's why we really, in my mind, have to drive home how important it is to be engaging up front where it's productive, where we can make sure that everyone, developers, individual homeowners, the community can be on the same page and have the same outlook on something. So I just wanted to put my 2 cents in there since we're giving feedback, and I think my thoughts there are a little contrary to what's been expressed so far. Thank you.
Alicia, you have something to add?
Thank you. Just, Brandon hasn't got to that part in the presentation yet, but just to reassure Councillor Bell and Councillor Miller, there are opportunities for the applicant to bump up. There are opportunities potentially for members of the public to bump up, and also for councillors. So we're working through a process of what that will look like, how the applications will be communicated to council in a way that they can make a determination as to what would be considered a bump up. We're also looking at potentially, the number of councillors. Can one councillor bump up an application? Maybe more? What is that? So all those things are things that we're looking at. However, the option for councillors to bump up an application is something that we're looking at. We're just fleshing out what that will look like.
Councillor Bell?
Yeah, thank you. Just one comment on what Councillor Oakley said. I agree with him. I think if a developer does everything asked of him in our plans and in our zoning bylaws, it should go. Simple as that. It's the issues of I'm more interested in the ones that don't, and with respect to our development community, none of them ever do.
If I could then suggest maybe, and this is something we'll see over the next several months as we engage more with the public on this community planning permit system. One of the very important things about this will be getting the public involved in creating this system. We're essentially rezoning the entire county of Brant. We're creating new zone standards. We have the opportunity to do that, or we can copy and paste old ones too. There's flexibility in it. But I would say encourage constituents, encourage residents, business owners to reach out to us. We're going to be reaching out and going into the community, obviously, on this as well. Once we have a bit more of the bylaw kind of put together, we find that is a better conversation piece for folks than just trying to understand the high level of it. But this is the time to determine, for a neighborhood to come together and have the discussion and determine what is an appropriate level of growth for that neighborhood, right? We've set some standards, we set some visions, I guess, visions, goals, objectives in the OP with policies, high level stuff. This is what it looks like on the ground. So that's why this, whether it's the zoning bylaw, whether it's community planning permit system, that's why this project is so important. So I'll just iterate that. So one thing we've done here with the development classes is try to provide a comparison of what it looks like with our zoning and site plan framework. So current framework, what types of applications may or may not fall under these classes. So under class 1, we've said site plan control and site plan amendments. That's kind of what that looks like right now. Those don't come to council. The class 2 stuff, that would be your minor bylaw amendments, minor variances. So right now, some of that goes to Committee of Adjustment. Some of that still does come to council, but there's that opportunity then to put that with staff or have the opportunity again to bump it up like we've talked about. That can come to council. And then class 3, so that's your major zoning bylaw amendments. So this is just, what this does is just put it in the context or the language of kind of what people are familiar with under our current framework. And again, this is flexible based on what we determine we want it to be, but that's kind of how things would fit into today's framework. So then the other piece of this, it comes to the delegated authority. So this is what typically you would see with a community planning permit system, with class 1 and 2 being the staff is the approval authority for that. And the idea for that is they're kind of more routine applications, and then we can kind of speed that up. They're not held to a timeline of waiting 1 month for a meeting of council or C of A to go through that process. They can come in, we can work through the process with them as they come in and get that kind of approval out the door. That also opens up the time. So because for staff, that reduces the administrative burden of having to go to those meetings. That opens up the time to focus a bit more on these class 3 applications to make sure, like, we know there's a larger public impact here. We can reach out to the public and be proactive about it, and then that is what comes to council for the decision making.
Councillor Bell.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Sorry to bang on the same subject, Brandon, but you describe class 2 as requires a variation, and class 3 requires a variation. The reality of it is it's always multiple variances or multiple variations. So how will you address the cumulative, as I said earlier, the cumulative effect of lots of minor variances? Because in your model here, it would be, we wouldn't see it. And I think that's it. That's not what I would like as a councillor. And I think some of my councillor colleagues would share that view.
And I think what I can say to that is we can take that back and look at what that looks like. We have had that discussion with staff, and we did purposely put the word one single variation in there. So the idea would be essentially that if there are multiple variations, that could bump it up to a class 3. So we can definitely take that back and have that consideration in the development of the bylaw.
Councillor House.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Brandon. I want to step back a little bit and I've appreciated some of the comments that have been made so far and agreed with a lot of them, but I'm trying to look at this from the community's perspective. And, you know, we heard 2 or 3 months ago that, you know, there's still 5,000 dwellings in the pipeline already at various stages of approval or appeal for Paris. And I see where this new process will have the benefit of streamlining things for staff so that we have less of a capacity issue with staff. But is it going to accelerate how fast we add to that pipeline? Like it wasn't that many years ago that we were talking about tapping the brakes. And we know that even though we might want to tap the brakes, that's not a very effective strategy. But does this go the other way? Does this make things happen too fast?
Tap the accelerator.
Yeah. Is it tap, like, is this taking away the speed camera on the but you know what I mean? Like, is it
Yeah.
You know, I'm being cute, but is this opening the floodgates a little bit, or just speeding things up so that pipeline gets filled faster? I think that's a concern. That'll be perceived as a concern.
Yeah. Jeremy, by all means.
To the mayor, to councillor, not necessarily should it do that. This should be just regular applications coming in and us potentially processing them in a faster manner. If we have the policies in our official plan to stage growth and outline when growth should happen, that should control that speed of which we see larger developments coming in. I would also say even if they were coming in, it's not wise for them to try jump many years ahead because that causes grief for them. They got to come back and fix things because they can't predict the market 5, 10, 15 years from now. So the market in and of itself actually stops itself to some extent too. So I don't foresee this as moving things faster in terms of getting things in the queue faster and just sitting there and doing nothing. I don't think it's going to happen. I think they're going to stage naturally as they're going to anyway at this point. I don't think they're going to come in any faster than they were originally intending to. So I don't see this going that route. I just see that as just when the approvals come in, we can process it in a more efficient manner and faster manner than dragging it out and having that problem that everybody's fighting and saying it's taking too long and we're not getting anywhere and we're not getting efficient decision-making.
Councillor House.
All right, quick follow-up through the mayor. Thank you for that, and I hope you're correct, but I did hear the word faster a lot in your response. And respectfully, to me, it sounds like things that were going to get the green light anyway through a complicated, laborious process are going to get a green light faster. And I still hold some concerns about what that does to our pipeline. I hope you're right that market conditions will help stage it.
If I could just add one comment to that. So what I would say is one of the issues obviously we're dealing with is speed of development. Community is rightfully scared of that and for various reasons that we're all aware of. But I think one of this important things to focus on with this community planning permit system is the quality of what will be approved and the opportunity we have here, and I've mentioned it, the community benefits, to really evaluate how those approvals, because they're going to come regardless, what those approvals will look like and the benefit that they will provide to the community. So it's not necessarily how much we're growing, like we're controlling that with the OP and we're going to look at that, but there's higher level things that play with that. It's the quality and what type of growth we're seeing that we're kind of shifting the focus to. And this tool will really enable us to do that.
Councillor Kyle and then Councillor Oakley.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor, through you to Brandon and Jeremy or whoever sees fit to answer. And I'm hoping it's a question that maybe helps to put Councillor Howes at ease a little bit. But so my understanding of this new process is it's simply about the process. We're not rezoning, redesignating, doing any of that. That's already been dictated within our official plan. So it's not as though if there's an application that comes in, that it's, if they're trying to change a zoning or a designation, that will come to us, right? Like it's not going to be green lighting something that would have maybe eventually got the green light down the road if there was that change, correct? Like it would be more the stuff that's already designated, kind of.
Yeah, so not quite. So what I guess I would say to that is that, so there's this component here where we're building our own system for the approvals, but there is also the idea of the zoning. So we've put our high-level designations and directions in place with the official plan, but we still do need to decide how that's implemented. And the zones through the community planning permit system will dictate that. So someone might have a R1 zone on their property right now. That could be carried over to the community planning permit system. It could have the same number. It could have a completely different zone number, but it could mean the same thing. So there will be that technical piece that we'll see over the next several months of chatting with property owners and seeing what does the zoning need to be on this property to facilitate the directions and objectives of the plan, if that makes sense. So there still is that zoning piece that we have to have the conversation about, but we'll kind of do that in tandem as we build the system as well.
Alicia, you want to add something?
Thanks, Your Worship. And just to kind of put Councillor Howes to respond to your question and, members of the public's mind at ease, what we're talking about here is site plan, we're talking about variances, we're talking about zoning. So we're not talking about subdivisions, which is where I think you're worried about the hundreds of houses. That's not part of what we're talking about right now. So we would be talking about the zoning, which would be prior, which would occur in many cases prior to that, or the site plan, which would occur after that. So there's still that. Subdivisions are the most complicated applications. They're the ones that take the longest, and so those would still follow through on the same process as they are now.
Councillor Oakley.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to staff, just sort of again, picking on the comments in regards to the speed, how this will relate to the speed of developments moving forward. You know, I suppose it's less of a question, more of a comment, but, you know, speaking as someone who's 29 and has lots of people my age looking for housing and it's unaffordable, I think it would be fair to say that, you know, the old adage, time is money, holds true. And when we have an ability to reduce the administrative burden and help people move along faster, which we have spent a lot of time talking about developers because I think that's the biggest concern, but this also should impact individual homeowners who want to do things faster with more certainty, more clarity, and that should reduce costs for everyone, which also then translates into reduced costs eventually on the market as well, which would help people, you know, my age, people who are looking to downsize, get into homes. Would that be a fair sort of assessment of what, at least the goals we would hope to come out of this?
Absolutely. I think at a very high level, and you see this with the push for housing at the province's level too, we recognize there's a supply issue, right? So increasing the kind of opportunity to add to that supply is something that will eventually come around and benefit everyone.
Councillor McAlpine and then Councillor Bell.
Just one of the points I think I brought up once before was, even though we're saying 45 days, the actual process could be much longer because we're doing so much more upfront. And I think one of the things was the pre-consultation meetings with the whoever's bringing in the applications. So a lot of that stuff can be sorted out previously to the application actually being brought forward. So I just pointing that out. So it's not a 45-day process.
Yeah, that's absolutely accurate. And unless there are other questions on the classifications in the system, what I'm going to suggest is Negin is going to come up and speak a bit about public engagement now. And part of the reason I'm saying that's a good segue is that idea of the 45 days is really just the staff's review of things. There's opportunity through pre-consultation, which we can make mandatory under a CPPS. We can't do that under our current framework, to require certain levels of public engagement and consultation before the application is actually submitted. So we'll hear about that a bit from Negin, but you'll hear about that as well during the official plan amendment presentation later this evening. So we'll chat a bit about public engagement.
Good. Councillor Bell's in line here, and then.
Yeah, could I just, before you leave the
course.
stage, Brandon?
I'll be back.
I think you said that you're going to do a full zoning bylaw update. I've been around this community long enough now to remember the last one, because I got involved in it when the now defunct Economic Development Advisory Committee did some work to support particularly the mapping. It's a huge exercise, but it's fundamental here because you're actually defining what Class 1 is in that. That's a huge piece of work. What's the timeline and the resources you think you need to do it?
So we actually have a draft of the bylaw already that we're working on behind the scenes. So we are this whole community planning permit system, that the resources in that are all included with what our consultant is working on. So the community planning permit bylaw will have the zoning standards in it. So the zoning bylaw becomes the community planning permit bylaw in essence. So the idea is that we're taking the bylaw we have now and the trends and issues that we talked about last time. We're creating a draft for discussion purposes, and then over the next several months, probably into mid next year, we'll go back and forth with council, with the public, do open houses, have all the conversations about the zoning. So that's going to pop up probably starting January, but that process itself is well underway.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Brandon. All right, moving on to the public engagement piece.
Do you know if there should be a slide?
Thank you. All right, so the community planning permit system doesn't have any legislative requirements for public meetings and notifications. It doesn't have any legislative requirements for timelines in terms of deeming an application complete either. This can be seen as a negative portion of the CPPS, but in fact, it gives us flexibility that allows the county to create public engagement measures that go beyond the Planning Act and are tailored to the needs of the community and our priorities as a county. There are 3 key opportunities that can help establish more meaningful engagement opportunities under the CPPS. The first one is that the process of CPP bylaw development itself gives us the opportunity to review and enhance engagement and notification approaches that we have taken so far. We can go to the community, ask them about how they would like to be informed about and get involved in development applications to ensure that their input is actually influencing the decision-making process early on in the process. The other thing is that through the CPPS, the county can ask for mandatory pre-consultation. Contrary to the changes introduced through Bill 185, which eliminates this requirement, through the CPPS, we can actually retain this requirement to ask for pre-consultation for all applications. And this helps us identify early in the process if additional engagement measures are needed in a case-by-case basis. It also establishes a clear standard for public involvement and provides applicant with kind of a documented roadmap in terms of what they need to do as part of their public engagement requirement before they submit their complete application. And lastly, there's a flexible timelines for deeming the application complete, as I mentioned, which enables that front-ended engagement to ensure that the community concerns and comments are addressed before we deem the application complete. So under the current process, all applications, regardless of their quality, need to be deemed complete within 30 days. CPPS doesn't have that requirement, so we can take our time to make sure that the engagement piece alongside with other required studies and reports have been done to the quality that is satisfactory to the county staff in council before we deem the application complete. And the application could be circulated to relevant agencies and county departments even before we deem it complete, whereas now it's circulated to those relevant departments only after it is deemed complete. So there's a lot of opportunity for do that back and forth with staff and different agencies to make sure that the application is in the quality that we would like to see and would accept. CPPS also allows the county to adopt different engagement measures based on each development class. For instance, we can have a pre-consultation with staff and a dedicated web page for online notices as a baseline for all applications. And then we can add enhanced notification and engagement measures depending on application's complexity and community interest. Enhanced notification measures may be in the form of like mail notices, on-site signage, advertising, follow-up notices, or engagement summary reports. And then the enhanced engagement measures can be in the form of like neighborhood meetings, open houses, information sessions, drop-ins and roundtables with stakeholders, virtual engagement and public hearing. These are some of the items, especially like the virtual engagement, the drop-ins, roundtables, or information sessions. These are kind of measures that we are not typically used to like adopt them and use them as part of the process. And CPPS allows us to kind of diversify the measures that we use to connect with people and collect their input.
Councillor Pierce has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you. So as far as the mail notices and stuff like that, if am I understanding correctly that we can, if we want to call it, set our standards as to what levels we want to do that? Because a lot of the things we hear is the fact that, oh, well, we didn't know anything about it because it's only, you know, so many, couple hundred meters away or whatever it is. So we can set that distance as well. We can expand that out.
Through mayor to councilor, that's correct. So we can, depending on the class of development, we can determine whether the application should be circulated within 60, 120 meters or go above that. There's a flexibility in terms of determining how should that look like, so, yeah.
That would be good because we hear that a lot. So thank you.
Councillor Miller.
Okay, so help me with this one. I thought a lot of that was already identified in the Planning Act.
Through mayor to councilor, which item is identified in?
As far as mail-out notices, isn't that identified in the Planning Act?
Yes, they are identified under the Planning Act, but they are kind of as a baseline and minimum standards that need to be met. But under this system, we can go above that and, for example, increase the circulation radius for maybe Class 2 or Class 3 applications that require more review.
I guess this goes without saying, through you, Mr. Mayor, everything we're looking at would obviously have to align with the Planning Act, and trusting that you guys are aware of that and you're making sure that's the case.
Jeremy?
Just the mayor to the councillor. So the zoning, the Planning Act, we typically deal with it under minor variances and zonings, does have regulations that specify the minimums we are to achieve. And most municipalities just use that as that's the best standard to work with, because once you go past it, it's hard legally to defend your distances. The CPPS model doesn't have those set requirements. So we're still working under the Planning Act, but under the CPPS model, which says we can establish whatever we think those are. So we're not bound by those other processes that you've typically seen as the minor variance and the zoning process of the rest of the Planning Act. So we get to establish our own new standards basically here. We could use them as a basis, but we get to establish our own standards under the CPPS model.
Thank you. News to me. Thank you.
All right.
Councillor Pierce has another
Sorry,
question.
Mr. Mayor. So just to clarify on that, we can set our own standards that are, in essence, for this example, a greater distance. We have to do what's in the Planning Act, that distance, but we can choose to go greater, not less.
So through the mayor to the councillor, because the CPPS doesn't have a set standard because there's no set classifications, we establish the classifications and we establish what goes with each of those classifications for notification and the requirements around it. We're actually establishing it. So you got to kind of, at this point, put your head away from the old Planning Act process, ignore the minor variance and severance and zoning requirements under the Planning Act that we've been dealing with, because we're dealing with a new process that allows us complete flexibility, basically, to establish that. And Nagin's going to go into that to say, here's kind of what we're looking as suggestions to you, but you get to pick and choose what goes into each kind of class and into each one, what happens in class 1, 2, or 3, and how much we do. So how much activity we have and kind of how much we circulate. So you're going to get, you have flexibility here to establish those standards completely. We aren't bound by anything else. So put the 60 and 120 out of your head for a while. I know it's hard because it's challenging even for us. So put them out, and we're going to go into this next slide, and she's going to kind of walk you through some potential routes of what this might look like.
Interesting, thank you.
Councilor McAlpine.
Is this something that we can bump up if we saw something we thought was controversial and we thought that more public engagement was needed, that we could bump it up to the next level? Or is it going to be set once we make this decision through this process?
Maybe we'll let Nagin kind of work her way into this a little bit, and then you can kind of see some of the things we're suggesting. As you move up in the scale, the requirement, the things change, and there's more activity with the public. So it automatically bumps things up, essentially. So there's more activity, and not all of them are required necessarily, but we would say, okay, you're moving into a class 3. We want to see, maybe these are things you need to do, but maybe you don't have to do every single one of them, but these are things we want you to do to meet some engagement requirements. So this next slide is kind of checking off some boxes of what we might see in each of those classifications. And like you note here, the higher up you go, there's much more engagement that's taking place, both with council as well as the public and how they're engaged.
Yeah, as Jeremy mentioned, this is like a potential engagement and notification options that we're exploring. It could be used based on each development class. We are also exploring these engagement measures as part of the official plan amendment to help proactively prepare for the engagement piece before transitioning to CPPS. So that gives us the opportunity to kind of try some of these and test them before we jump into the CPPS. So under the CPPS, a Class 1 application would require mandatory pre-consultation and website notices as kind of a baseline. Like all of the classes need to have those two measures. And then for Class 2, additional measures such as mail notices, on-site signage, targeted engagement in forms of neighborhood meetings or open houses, information sessions, or virtual engagement could be required. And for Class 3, it would be Class 1 and 2 requirements plus public hearing, newspaper or digital ad, and engagement summary reports and follow-up mail notices. So the idea of this tiered approach is to ensure the more complex applications receive greater public scrutiny, and there are more opportunities for the developer and the county to connect with the people and have their input.
Councillor Bell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Nadia. There's a long list in Class 3. How much of that is done before we deem an application complete and the 45-day clock starts ticking, if I'm understanding the importance of the 45-day approval schedule?
Through Mayor to Councillor. So that is some of the things that we would appreciate your input to see what is sufficient in terms of the number of engagement activities that need to be done before deeming an application complete. Is like doing 3 or 4 of these items enough to deem the application complete? Should it be based on a case, like on a case-by-case basis to determine how many of these elements need to be fulfilled before deeming in the application complete, or should all of them be the requirement. But the intent is that we give a range of options to the developer and the applicant to kind of pick based on what they're able to do to meet the requirement for public engagement.
Yeah, if I may, just to follow, I'm just looking at picking out 4 things: neighbourhood meetings, open houses, information sessions, and public hearings. All of those things take time to set up. I just not quite sure when the clock starts ticking on the 45-day approval schedule, and what I'm not sure we can say to you what needs to be in there before that clock starts ticking. I think we need to hear from you where you think the clock starts ticking and what's done before it.
Through the mayor to the council member. So if there were certain things you wanted to see during a process, that would be nice, just to let us know. Yeah, when the 45-day clock starts is basically when we've said everything's been submitted to us as complete. So we have the money, we have all the reports the way we expect them to be, and we've engaged in at least the mandatory pre-consultation. Now, in a stage 3, you could say, now, we wouldn't necessarily say someone do a neighborhood meeting, an open house, and an information session. That'd be an overkill to maybe see 3 different types of things. So it depending on the neighborhood, may depend what one's more appropriate. So we'd probably be saying that before they get too far in the process, we probably want to see some sort of public engagement in a phase 3 early on as part of a complete application as a suggestion. So the neighborhood is seeing it before it gets done, because then they feel, because then they're giving input before somebody's kind of almost made it a little too firm, gives them time to give their feedback before it's finalized and comes forward to council. Obviously, council would, with the stage 3, the class 3, the public hearing would be in front of council. So that part would be a council for sure item. So in those 45 days, whether they could do another session if they wanted to, let's say we said, okay, do a neighborhood meeting in advance, and that's our requirement, is a bare minimum on that. But during the process, we want you to have another session to say this is the presentation, what we're presenting to council before it comes to council, is something we could look at. It means a lot of work on their end too to do it in between those timelines. But you're just saying to them, you need to do another session in there to make that work and to get some feedback. So those are things we might be looking at, as whether council thinks that's worthy to do that mid-session or just rely on the public meeting here with council.
Yeah, I think through you, Mr. Mayor, I think one of the things that I would like to avoid is that we say we're having a public input session because that's what we have to do in order to meet the process. What we've got to be alert to is that when the public give us input, we need to be able to process it and decide whether it's something we should adapt the plan to, or we should ignore. And I'm just seeing that as taking potentially some time. So I know we're going to talk about the 45-day approval schedule at a subsequent meeting, but to me, this is one of the key drivers that when you have a complete application, if you then share it with the public and the public have a significant reaction to it and genuinely important issues that we need to address, 45 days may not be enough.
Councillor Kyle.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor, through you. So my question is, so I understand sort of the classes 1 through 3 and the different levels of engagement that you're proposing as part of those. But I'm also wondering if there's an opportunity for this system to provide a little bit of flexibility in terms of, and some of my colleagues talked a little bit earlier about sort of that radius for when you're sending out notices by mail. And I'm going to give an example of where I'm going with this, because I'm wondering if specifically there is some flexibility for different parts of the county based on kind of what's happening within those communities. So recently, our property was close to where they wanted to make a rezoning in Blandford Blenheim. So they followed the minimum standards in terms of where they needed to send out notices. But what that didn't capture is that the current zoning of that property, as well as the one they were proposing, was actually further affecting other properties that weren't, their mailboxes weren't within that 120-meter radius, particularly with something like an institutional zoning, which is double the distance, or, you know, just regular MDS. So I'm just wondering if there is flexibility within this. So even if it's a class 2 or it's a class 3, whether we don't have to put like a blanket, this is who we would send to, if we can look at them on a case by case and go, okay, well, this is a zoning for, I don't know, some sort of agricultural, whatever. We actually need to expand that radius to actually capture more of the neighbors who might have concerns with that, rather than just doing the 120.
Through the mayor to councilor, absolutely. I think as part of this built-in flexibility, there's an opportunity to further differentiate these engagement measures, and one of the items that could benefit from that is like the circulation radius for mail notices. And we can definitely explore like what are the defined criteria to determine the circulation radius. Should it be based on class by class basis, or having kind of a standardized circulation radius in place and then provide some flexibility to go above that if needed? Thank you. I will pass it on to Brandon to go over the next slide. Thank you.
Okay, I'm just going to finish up shortly as well. So now that we've kind of had that conversation, actually, I might just circle back to the engagement piece while I'm thinking about it. And the idea that what we can do here is require some of that engagement to be done as before we've called the application complete. And I think that will be a really important piece of what this community planning permit system can do. Because if we require them to come in for a pre-consultation, we can say to them, okay, well, based on the scale of your application, you're actually required to host a neighborhood meeting before your application comes in. And then you're required to provide us with an engagement summary. And we'll attend those meetings, but you, as the applicant, provides us with an engagement summary that tells us what everyone said and how you've addressed it in your application. That's an opportunity that's available to us through this community planning permit system. What that looks like on a different scale, so that's something we can have a conversation about, but that type of flexibility is the nature of this system. And I think that will be really helpful to facilitating meaningful input when an application comes to council and it's presented. It's gone through a lot of the studies already, and people are under, whether or not it's true, but people are under the impression that it's pretty set in stone. So we have an opportunity with this community planning permit system to get ahead of that and have those conversations with the public about kind of iterations of the design and iterations of the application. And I think that will be a really important piece and something that we as a municipality can build ourselves and be really proud of. So I just wanted to add that piece. So this slide here just kind of shows all of these building blocks put together. We have the classes, what that means, the application types, the potential approval authority, and then the idea that, okay, here's what your engagement would look like for each classification. So what this is, as Negin explained, this tiered approach to the classifications, to the approvals, to the engagement really does help us balance efficiency for these simple applications and transparency for the ones that are more complex, the ones that we would want to come to council and have more public scrutiny over. And like I said, what we're doing here is creating our own system rather than relying on the rigid requirements of the Planning Act. So as Jeremy mentioned, kind of throwing away those numbers specifically of the notifications, we have some flexibility now to address more kind of site-specific instances. And that's something we really just don't have under the current framework. And you'll hear a bit of this in the presentation on the official plan amendment tonight, but that's a framework we're trying to kind of set up in advance of the community planning permit system again, because we see some benefit in being able to try and test this out and see what works. So just a quick note on appeal rights under the CPPS. So just to clarify, the appeal rights under the community planning permit system don't really change from what the appeal rights are now. Bill 185 changed the appeal rights for that, so only really the applicant can appeal along with kind of the public bodies in the municipality. So if someone makes an application, they can appeal the decision. And that will stay the same with the community planning permit system. So any registered owner of the land, as long as they've made an oral or written submission to council, during the development of the community planning permit system, anyone in the municipality can appeal the community planning permit bylaw. So again, this goes back to me saying this is very important for the public to get involved in this process. Because this, not that we want people to appeal it, we absolutely want to make sure that we're presenting a bylaw that doesn't get to that point, but this is the opportunity for people to have that input. And this kind of shows the importance of that, of creating this system. One of the things that we've talked about a bit internally is the idea of an internal appeal process. So if staff makes a decision on something and someone does not like that decision, we can have that discussion with our consultant about the potential to create that appeal process where they could take it to council for reconsideration of the staff decision. So if that's of interest to council too, that's something we can look into. But we just kind of wanted to put that out there about the appeal rates and that particular process that we can investigate.
Councillor Oakley and then Councillor Bell.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, to Brandon. And just a clarification on that internal appeal process, would we, I suppose we're making these decisions now, but in your mind here, would that be from anyone, including like an appeal made by a member of the general public being able to appeal a decision made by staff, or simply the applicant would be able to?
So what I'll say is that that is up for discussion, but we would probably seek some legal input on that first. The idea that anyone could appeal it, there's pros and cons to that. And that's stuff that staff will kind of look into to see if we are to build a process like this, what that looks like. What are the appropriate folks that can appeal something, if anyone. So yeah, we'll take that back and find out some more information about that, maybe to see what would be the most appropriate. But again, there's flexibility in this system, and I think that's what it comes down to is trying to make it as transparent as possible, while still acknowledging that we're streamlining the process and trying to make sure that if something is in the official plan and it's has a right in the bylaw, it can make its way through the process without hiccups.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Bell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can I go back one slide, Brandon? Yeah. So the class two, just going on to class two, one of the things we have talked about before, and we've talked about delegation of authority, is that there would be some kind of annual review of how staff have used their delegated authority. I would ask that you might think about that as you develop this a little further. So if there are 10 items that are in class two, an annual report saying, this is what we looked at, and then it gives us confidence that, these are collectively minor variances. I'm watching a TV program at the moment, which is quite interesting. If anybody gets to watch it, it's called D.I. Ray. It's on Netflix. But there, it gets into the territory, and it's really uncomfortable territory for somebody in municipal government, where councillors are influencing decisions. And I know for a fact that doesn't happen here. We simply don't have that ability to influence decisions. But if you put authority into staff in class two, we need to be careful to protect you as staff, that you don't get viewed as somebody that can influence a process unnecessarily. And that's where we need to have this kind of audit loop that helps everybody feel comfortable that there's transparency in the system and everybody's treated fairly. You don't want to come to Brandon with a variance and say, can I do this? And you think, yeah, of course you can. You go to somebody else with the same variance and yes, you can do it, but under these conditions. We need to have a really clear, transparent system when you're in this, what I think is a grey area between things that are, they meet every requirement that we have, every standard, so there's no doubt about it. You say yes, to the other end of class three where council is making the decision on big projects. I want to feel comfortable that we're not putting staff in difficult places. So as you work the details of this, if you could come back with some kind of audit process or annual review process, I would very much appreciate it.
Through the mayor to Councilor Bell. That's actually a good question and comment. We were discussing that today ourselves in our planning department as we're introducing it to staff as how that would work. And just what that means, because that same question was like, how do we make sure that check and balances are there? And we're still looking for those checks and balances. So junior staff and planning staff would still be circulating a report and crafting a report with their professional opinion that would still go to a manager for review and then still come to myself and or Alicia for sign off and approval. So there's going to be checks and balances internally that not just one person is writing it and approving it. It has to go through people and reviewed. So that's part of what we're looking for in some of our checks and balances. And like you mentioned, we want some clarity as what's a class 1, what's a class 2, what's a class 3, and making sure nobody's trying to squeak a class 3 into a class 2 so they don't have to come to council or something. So we are going to be there'll be a learning curve as we will be doing it, but we are looking at those checks and balances to make sure that we are going to be kind of doing things appropriately. We don't want anything seen untoward to anybody, and that we want our professional opinion to be strong. So we are still even telling staff they're going to write planning reports for me or whoever to approve, because we have to justify that they've done their thorough planning review and it's done right.
Okay. So the next steps for this project, and thank you for the conversation and discussion, it's very much appreciated. I'm sure there'll be other pieces of this particular topic that we'll want to talk about, and we can maybe do some follow-up with council about some specifics like the radius and that. If there's input people want to give, please, we're happy to hear that. But with respect to next steps, if council's found this helpful, we'll continue these kind of education discussion sessions on these chunks of the community planning permit system as we kind of work towards developing it. That will work kind of concurrently with the draft of the bylaw, and that's why we wanted to get these ones in front of you now, because as we go back and forth with our consultants who create a draft that we like, this will help shape that. And this will help probably shape it more so than some of those other pieces. So this has a crucial piece of that draft bylaw. So our goal still is after the holiday break and into the new year, that's when kind of a draft of the bylaw would come out, and we would start that engagement piece with the public, the open houses and doing our kind of roadshow, the stuff we did with our official plan. We were even talking to some other municipalities about, there was one that did a street party, then they had some like planning places people could go to learn about individual pieces of the system. So not a promise that we're doing that, but there's some creative engagement pieces that we're looking at. And if we're gonna talk about meaningful engagement with our own community planning permit system, we recognize we need to do that with the public as well. So there'll be lots of opportunity for that over the next several months. And with that, if there are other questions, I'm happy to answer that, but that is the end of the discussion for now.
Thanks, Brandon. I think it's a lot of information. I think there's lots of comments that are coming forward, going to come forward from council. You've got a lot to think about tonight. I think what I need now is I need a motion to accept this report, RPT 0392-25, as information, and to send the comments from council to staff to be compiled and brought back as a recommendation. Councillor Kyle and Councillor Howes, I believe. Any other questions? All those in favor? Thank you. We have nothing for in camera. Our next meeting is at 6 o'clock here today. Motion to adjourn. Councillor Oakley? Thank you. We'll see you again at 6 o'clock.